past 42 years, over 5,000 concerned people from across the globe have come together in Eugene, Oregon for the oldest and largest public interest environmental law conference in the world. This conference educates and inspires action on environmental and social justice goals. Here are some highlights of the 42nd Public Interest Environmental Law Conference.
Welcome everyone. Happy Sunday morning at PIELC. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is our panel this morning is on the fall solutions of renewable fuels and renewable diesel. So I'm really excited to learn from our awesome panel here. When you walked in, I hope that everyone picked up some of our wonderful programs that have the bios of all of these awesome panelists. If you didn't, you can grab them in the back on the ends of those tables. There's also great maps and calls to action. So make sure you pick those up. So my name is Deneen O'Rourke. I'm with 350 PDX, and I'm here moderating this panel this morning. And this is very exciting for us because this panel series is actually on tour right now. We have been, since October of 2022, we have been doing this series called Rumble on the River, where about once a month we bring together a different panel of folks and take it in a different, put it on in a different part of Portland, and all learn together about, we started out mostly just being about fighting the fossil fuel industry in the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub, which is a region in Northwest Portland, where 90% of all of the fuels for the state of Oregon are stored right along the Willamette River. So we've been making new issues in here too, and this one is going to focus, you'll get to hear a lot about one of our main villains in Portland, Zenith Energy, and you'll get to learn a lot about renewable fuels and what is currently being pushed on our movement and greenwashing around that. I also want to take a moment to thank Peter Drakovich and Jim Lockhart here filming for all of our comrades in Portland who can't be here so they can watch this. Thank you so much for doing that. And I also want to thank all of the amazing nearly 40 organizations that have sponsored this community forum series over the past year. They're all up here, and we couldn't do it without all of their support. Great, so to set the stage here, this region and this room is full of winners. These are just some of the victory headlines over the past decade plus of different fossil fuel projects that have been stopped in the Northwest. And many people in this room are part of why these headlines were written. And so much so that the Northwest has been dubbed where fossil fuels go to die. Yes. Right? Pretty cool. But the fossil fuel industry is committed to drill and export every last drop of oil. So what are they to do? It's so hard for them out in the Northwest. So they have been coming up with a new strategy in our region because we've been so successful. One of those strategies is expanding existing facilities instead of building new ones. We went into depth about this at a Friday panel about the GTN Express gas infrastructure pipeline expansion. Expanding an existing project often requires a lot fewer permits. They can get grandfathered in. It's harder to rally public outcry. And then there are other strategies, just keep doing what we're doing, but let's rebrand it as renewable. And the fuels that we're going to transport are going to be just as polluting. but we're going to trick everyone and just call it renewable and use the language of the movement itself. So it's like that adage, like first they fight you, or first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. Then they take your language and co-opt it and use it for their own, right? Start all over again. And we start all over again. So that's what we're seeing here. And so this morning we're going to hear a bit about this first strategy with Zenith Energy. They've expanded an existing facility in Portland, but we're mostly going to be focusing on this second strategy of this greenwashing. And here are some examples of what we're seeing right now all over the fossil fuel industry. This is an Exxon ad. The future of energy may come from where you least expect it. They're fueling a sustainable energy future. There's Chevron, renewable diesel. We're seeing this everywhere. And then locally in Oregon and Portland, from Zenith Energy. They're leading Portland's renewable fuel transition. This is from their website. Even though they have increased their throughput of crude oil through our community every year exponentially for the past 5 years plus. But don't worry about that. They're just going to be doing renewables. So we just have to trust them, right? Yeah, this is another Zenith. This is a still from one of their PR videos where they are committing to reducing their air emissions by nearly 80%. So we're up against a lot of greenwashing here.
Is that truthful?
We're going to get into it, yep. So this panel is going to get into all of these details and debunk and share more of this information so that we can all be armed and ready to fight back against this misinformation as it's going to keep coming more aggressively into our communities. We see this as a pretty major threat, and we want to arm everyone with knowledge and facts and rebuttals to this greenwashing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Nick Caleb with Breach Collective, the climate and energy attorney, and he's going to start us off by going into the specifics on our local greenwashing villain, Zenith Energy. Totally right.
Wow. So, my name is Nick Caleb. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the climate and energy attorney at Breach Collective. Breach Collective is a 3.5-year-old nonprofit based in Eugene and in Portland. You might have seen some of my colleagues on other panels around gas infrastructure and unionizing over the course of the conference. I live north of here, Portland area, and I work not exclusively, but a lot on issues in the critical energy infrastructure hub. So the story of Zenith is one, it's a rocky road, I guess you could say. We've had some big ups, we've had some lows, and it's a fight that kind of just keeps dragging on. But the community is unwilling to accept what's going on right now, and it's a testament to Portland, I think, in general, the climate movement there, and also residents who probably don't, involve themselves much in the climate movement, but really care about the safety of their neighborhoods and their watershed, that we keep fighting and trying to stop this facility from expanding and bringing forward what Deneen accurately called a very equally or more dangerous project that's just kind of got a greenwash label on it. So the history of Zenith is that it used to be an asphalt terminal owned by a different company, already sited in this area in the critical energy infrastructure hub. It was bought by a company called Arc Logistics, and then they shared ownership with Zenith for a couple years, and then Zenith took full ownership. As soon as they had ownership of the facility, they transformed it into an oil transloading terminal, which basically just means that trains come in, they get heated, the oil leaves the train cars, goes into a storage facility on site, and then they move it to a ship to go somewhere else. When it first started, there was some indication that they might be transporting it internationally. I think most of the oil now is being moved to refineries throughout the Pacific Northwest and in California as well. So Zenith pissed everybody off right away when they came to town because they started lying to everybody about what they were going to do. In 2019, they promised the city of Portland and state regulators that they would definitely not increase their oil throughput. And as Deneen mentioned, reporting this year, this is year 5 that they've increased their oil throughput in Portland. Not good. And we were equal to the task when they first came in. People paid attention. We put a lot of pressure on our local governments to take a stand against the oil terminal. And we found creative ways to put pressure on Zenith and actually came up with a really good way to deny the facility entirely so that they couldn't do these activities anymore. So there's, as a part of a air permit renewal in Oregon, if your facility has intensified its use or it's changed its quality in a significant way, you have to go back to a local government and get what's called a land use compatibility statement. This is a quirk of Oregon law that has to do with how we incorporate land use into basically everything. But we convinced our State Department of Environmental Quality that the city of Portland had to require a new LUX, the acronym, for Zenith. And when Zenith applied for a new LUX, the city of Portland in 2021 denied that LUX. Thus, they couldn't get an air permit. Thus, they would have to start doing what they were doing, transporting oil through the community. There was a lawsuit about it, and the city largely held that authority through legal challenges. We had a special land use court called Land Use Board of Appeals. That court said the city is allowed to do what it did in denying this land use compatibility statement, but they didn't make detailed enough findings as to why Zenith's violation of its comprehensive plan can be a reason to deny this LUX. And so, we were celebrating. It's very hard to defeat an existing fossil fuel terminal, much easier to stop a fossil fuel terminal from being built. So the community was very excited about this, and basically we're waiting for litigation to finish so that the city then could produce deeper and more detailed findings and be done with Zenith, right? So that's where we were. Things were very good. But a year later, in October of 2022, kind of out of the blue, the city of Portland announces, actually, and this is, I should say, while litigation is still ongoing, there's an agreement that's been made between the city and Zenith. And, actually Zenith now is a renewable energy company. And they are instead of being out of alignment with Oregon or with Portland's land use laws, they are totally in compliance. And the same reasons why we denied the land use compatibility before are now the reasons that we're affirming their new air permit. And this basically just caught everybody out there. We had no idea what was going on. There were some changes in political leadership that we thought were a little bit more benign than they turned out to be. So we set about trying to figure out what's going on. I'm going to play just a quick little pump up video for you real quick.
People just started seeing oil trains coming through their communities. Zenith turned an asphalt terminal into an oil by rail terminal. This was a project that nobody voted on or said yes to. The public response was outrage.
Portland's climate movement fought hard against Zenith for years. There was a big public campaign asking city officials to reject the terminal.
We still have the ability to stop it.
It worked. The city ultimately said, no, you're not allowed to do this anymore.
It was like this huge moment of celebration. We won the Zenith fight. And then out of nowhere, the city gives Zenith the green light to continue transporting crude oil until 2027.
It smelled a little fishy to me. Why would the city suddenly turn around and approve something that they claimed to oppose?
We started submitting public records requests. And the more those records came in, the more it was clear that this was orchestrated.
The tone suggests that both Dan Ryan and Carmen Rubio want to be partners with Zenith. The public thinks that their role should be to regulate an industry like that.
We have enough now to show that there was a backroom deal.
City commissioners were not only talking in private with Zenith, but then going to great lengths to cover that up.
We saw elected officials acting as agents of Zenith rather than protecting our city.
Zenith Energy is running trains that could explode at any time through city neighborhoods. The risk is massive.
Oil trains derail and explode regularly.
A lot of people live within that blast zone.
It changes the entire landscape of this fight.
All right, well, good enough for now. So I'm going to skip through this a little bit close. The video was supposed to be a shorthand for a lot of what happened administratively, but what we ended up figuring out through a series of records requests from journalists and internally and from some partners is that the city, while it was litigating against this oil terminal, and while partners of environmental organizations were intervening in litigation to defend the city's authority, the city was basically like simultaneously negotiating with Zenith, keeping all this stuff as secret as they possibly could, basically creating like a sham process to like steward Zenith to the place where then they could put a bunch of stuff on paper and then the city could rubber stamp it over like a review period. And so when this happens, he said, this is an administrative decision. This is just, Zenith gives us a file of stuff. We look at it with our clear, objective eyes, and what are we supposed to do? Like, it's just the machine in operation. It's not at all what happened. Zenith hired some lobbyists that had connections to city actors, and basically the kind of crucial moment, I think, was when a bunch of city officials, 2 city commissioners, a bunch of staff, went to the oil terminal itself to hear basically a pitch from Zenith while they're litigating without other parties that had intervened in that legislature, like literally going behind closed doors at a oil terminal, and all of the details and outcomes of what eventually became their new kind of plan to be a renewable facility were discussed at that meeting. So he pretended like there were no notes taken at that meeting. It took us a lot of digging to find out that, in fact, there were notes, handwritten notes with names blocked out, things like that. And so really, really shady stuff. And so there's really good reporting on this from in DSMOG by a guy named Nick Cunningham, who lives in Portland. And also we had really good reporting in our local paper called Street Roots. So I encourage you to look into that if you're interested in knowing more about the details. And I'm just going to skip through that. So basically, where are we? So we took all this information, we put it together in a letter to our State Department of Environmental Quality and said, look, under Oregon law, you have authority under how our state and local collaboration around land use goes. If you look at the evidence that we're going to give to you and you think that the process that the city went through may not be legally sufficient, a very low threshold, may not, like indication that this might be a bit untoward, you can actually deny the air permit or remand the air permit back to the city to fix that. So we, Columbia River Keeper, Lime River Keeper, Portland Harbor Community Coalition, Portland Audubon, put this brief basically together for our State Department of Environmental Quality, sent them, substantial evidence that they didn't follow their own rules and laws and that they were doing all sorts of stuff that like even a lawyer can look at and be like, oh, come on, like this is way out of line with how things are supposed to happen. And they basically just were like, not our lane, like we have a land use court, go talk to them, leave us alone. The problem with that is that because the city hid all of these discussions and they put things away, it took us so long to get the information about this, all of the appeals deadlines at the land use court had already passed by the time we started pushing on our State Department of Environmental Quality. So now we're in like a pushing match with our state DEQ about how do we actually go about doing this. So here's the administrative rule if folks are curious. So they send us a letter back that says, hey, thanks for your thoughtful letter, and explain to us how the system works. In their mind, they basically say, what may not be legally sufficient to us means is that you send us a piece of paper and we basically look to make sure that all the T's are crossed and that the boxes are checked. And we're like, no, that's not what that means. Sorry. And so we went and got more of our friends and got some unions and some community groups and wrote another letter and said, look, this is unacceptable. This is silly behavior. This is covered in the news. Everybody knows that this is a ridiculous situation. We urge you to embody leadership by using your authority to act rather than telling advocates to seek recourse elsewhere. It's not acceptable for state regulators to stand by, abide flagrant disregard for the law, disclaim authority to act in response, and ratify legally insufficient local decisions. We need you to do more for Oregon's residents and the environment. We also have a pretty decent county commission in Multnomah County that said the same thing to DEQ. They sent a letter and said, look, we read these rules like the advocates do. You have the authority, and as the public health authority in this community, we want you to deny this permit. This is just oil trains masquerading as a kind of renewable energy project. They said, no, again, we don't want to hear that from you. So we're in a pushing match with the state DEQ right now, and in the meantime, just a couple months ago, or a month ago, this month actually, sorry, I don't know how time works, Zenith, again, the year after, they said we will be a renewable energy facility by 2027. No oil operations in 2027. They just, again, increased their oil throughput at the same levels that they have been. So 419 million gallons, mostly Bakken crude, another 40 million gallons up from what they've been doing in the past. So we've been calling BS on this from the beginning. We said, look, just the way that this is done, there's no guarantee. Even if Zenith wanted to do this, the market's not going to sustain it. If the market could sustain it, renewable fuels, basically just like diesel, is not safer for our community. The climate benefits, as I'm sure you'll hear later, are in question at best. And in some cases, this might be worse for the climate than oil, if you can believe that. And these things are still going to explode if they tip over. There's still danger there. We have a background seismic risk in the area. A lot of these storage facilities are very old. So if we do have an earthquake, we'll have one of the biggest oil spills in US history in our community. Why would we be adding to that? It doesn't make any sense. So where are we going now? In order for Zenith's new plan, thinking plan to get legitimized, they have to get a new air permit. So there will be a draft process around that. This advocacy, we feel really strong that we've got a strong legal standing to push the Department of Environmental Quality on this. And there are some actions that are imminent. We haven't announced them yet, so I'm going to be cagey about what that is. But if you pay attention, in 2 weeks or so, there will be some more working on this. So there's something interesting to look forward to push DEQ to actually accept its responsibility as a regulator and to implement the rules that are in state law already that have really clear directives to them. And then, in the end, there's always lawsuits, although we hope to not have to go there. So in conclusion, Zenith is a really interesting example. This happens a lot in Portland. Portland being a kind of somewhat lefty green community. We still have a lot of fossil fuel facilities. We have gas utilities and all the rest, but everybody has to brand themselves as an organic grocer in order to do business in Portland. It's somewhat effective, right? And they keep doing it. And so Portland is kind of the innovative place for branding a fossil fuel facility that wants to be seen as a good environmental and social actor. And so this is kind of if they succeed in Portland, expect this type of branding in every city that has a port, right? You can say, oh yeah, we're going to reduce our air emissions down 80%. Yeah, we jacked them up 110% last year, but we're down 80 this year, so we're not going to talk about that 30 that they're up, right? I should also mention that there are communities that live really close to this stuff, and so this is a really good example of what some folks call a sacrifice zone, right in the middle of an urban area. So Zenith for us is probably one of the worst actors in that area, but it's not the only oil storage or gas or toxic storage facility. And so for us, this fight's really important in winning because we don't just have to deal with Zenith, we have to deal with 90% plus of Oregon's liquid fuels being stored in this dangerous area. So, but if we win this fight, if we can figure out a way to win this fight, it's going to give us a lot of momentum toward a broader transition in that area. It's not the subject of today's Rumble, but that's a lot of where community is starting to vision. It's like, why do we have to tolerate this like sacrifice zone in urban area? Aren't we supposed to be transitioning to renewable energy? What's our 10, 15, 20-year plan in order to get there? And what is this infrastructure? Like, how can we get rid of it? So I'm going to stop there as I'm running out of time and pass it to whoever's next.
Thank you, Nick. Now we are going to welcome Gary with Biofuel Watch. And now we're going to get to really dig into more of the science behind renewable fuels and the threats here.
All right, thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to Janine and everyone for putting this panel together. My name is Gary Hughes. I use he, him pronouns, and I and my family, we are living in Ohlone territory in East Bay, California. But I have very strong roots here in Eugene, and it's really cool to come back to ELAW, thinking back 30 years ago, some of the basketball games we played on that court in front of the old law school building. I think that's where I cut a lot of my early teeth in environmental activism. So to start with, though, I'd like to share just a little bit of information about our organization, Biofuel Watch. Some background really quick, because we're an international organization, really strong base in the UK. We have a very strong climate justice focus. And with that, to recognize that our fiscal sponsor is the organization Global Justice Ecology Project, with whom I work a great deal. We're part of a number of international networks and coalitions trying to address this tension between climate false solutions and what is happening on the land. We are really focused on building solidarity with our partners internationally in the global south. And as a matter of fact, I don't spend any time really with this reaching across the aisle type work to find solutions ostensibly that work for everybody here in the global north. We've increasingly found that what is settled upon here as a compromise on environmental policy is being weaponized against our partners in the global south. So I'm really proud to say that Biofuel Watch has had an integral role in the Hoodwinked in the Hothouse project, for instance, which you can find at climatefalsesolutions.org. So share this really quickly to get, a little bit of our perspective on these issues across to everyone, so you know how we are addressing these questions like bioenergy. So in the slides that I'd like to share with you here today, I want to help people develop a bit of a vocabulary about what's happening with what we see as a really dangerous trend of decision makers falling into the trap of the political convenience that comes with converting fossil fuel infrastructure to bioenergy infrastructure. And we're seeing that with the conversion of coal plants around the world to burning woody biomass. But in the Bay Area in particular, we've seen right up front what's happening with the conversion of petroleum refineries to making liquid biofuels. But to get to that, I wanted to flag a bit of work that I started doing a few years ago around a project in Lakeview, Oregon that was called Red Rock Biofuels, where they had a plan to convert woody biomass into making what's called sustainable aviation fuel. Well, we knew that this was a boondoggle. We knew it was basically a bunch of snake oil salesmen trying to sell their project to decision makers. And Red Rock Biofuels actually brought in more than $300 million of public money before they went belly up in late 2022. And by early 2023, it was being reported that they had gone out of business. And in the Oregonian, it was great because the writer did grab onto one of the main messages from our organization, is that while there's a lot of talk about second generation of feedstocks and all these new fancy ways that we're going to find a magical way to make a biofuel product that increasingly it's really seen and understood that the only way to scale these fields up is by reverting to the use of what was known even a couple of decades ago to be a very dangerous trend, and that's to depend upon crop-based type feedstocks. We're talking about soy, palm oil, canola, and somewhat related to that then would be the ethanol and the use of corn. So the scaling up is what we're seeing happen in the Bay Area then. In the Bay Area, there's 5 petroleum refineries. There's a corridor of refineries in the North Bay, and we'll get a chance to learn about that a little bit more. And we'll even learn a little bit more about where Red Rock biofuels went with the next energy, which is probably one of the most important topics of this entire panel because it is an emerging issue for people who are living in Portland and in the Columbia River. But what we want to do then is share our experience in the Bay, what we've seen with the emergence of the conversion of 2 of the 5 refineries in the San Francisco Bay Area to making liquid biofuels. Basically, there is the Marathon Martinez refinery, which is way back in unincorporated Contra Costa County, near really on the shores of the Bay Delta. And then up here a bit further, right on the Carquinez Straits, is the Phillips 66 Rodeo refinery, which is a refinery that has been there for more than 125 years now. And so one of our assessments, and when I say our, I'm talking about a whole community of individuals and organizations that work in the San Francisco Bay Area in this refinery corridor, is we have seen that state authorities are promoting the conversion of these refineries as a means of protecting the stranded assets of these companies. We're talking about refineries that are inevitably going to be decommissioned. That is their future. But climate policy is being used now to protect the multi-billion-dollar companies that own these refineries so that they can squeeze more wealth out of them before the inevitable happens. So again, there's 5 refineries. Chevron has a refinery, okay? PBF, they bought a Shell refinery in Martinez. There's a company called Valero that has a refinery. And then we have the Phillips 66 and the Marathon refineries that are converting to liquid biofuels. So in late 2019, there was an incident, a major fire at a tank farm that's connected to the Phillips 66 refinery. Now, I share this with you because the refinery corridor is a really dangerous place for people to live. This is a fire that went on for 8 hours, and they burned up a whole tank of ethanol. So to make it clear that a lot of times people talk about biofuels, and there is sort of an air of these fuels are benign, and we want to put that aside right away and use this as an example that when this stuff burns, it burns and it burns toxically, and it's very dangerous. So in late 2019 then, this incident happened, and we'd all been working on trying to find some accountability around these refineries in the Bay. And then of course, everyone knows that in 2020, we ran into the pandemic shutdown. And one thing that happened then is there was a demand destruction. People stopped traveling, they stopped flying, they stopped driving, they stopped buying liquid fuels. And so by May and June of 2020, the Marathon refinery actually had to shut down. It's such a dangerous refinery that they couldn't reduce their production safely. They just had to shut down altogether. Phillips 66 was able to really reduce their production. We're like, okay, here's a chance for us. What can happen out of this? But then, just as was spoken earlier, Deneen and Nick, well, the industry's like, oh my God, what are we gonna do? Well, Phillips 66 announced in the summer of 2020 that they were convert their refinery to making liquid biofuels, and shortly afterward, Marathon did so. And that's when we began, a lot of work around the environmental review process under the California Environmental Quality Act. In late 2020, they started the scoping, and by fall of 2021, both Marathon and Phillips 66 released the draft environmental impact reports under CEQA, as we call it, the California Environmental Quality Act, for these refineries. As a matter of fact, it was in one day in fall of 2021 that Phillips 66 released their DEIR, of nearly 1,000 documents, and 1 hour later, Marathon released theirs. And this was all under the authority of Contra Costa County. So in a matter of hours, suddenly community groups had thousands of pages of documents to work with. Well, we pushed back really hard. We challenged what was being presented in those environmental reviews as being inadequate. And by early 2022 then that the Planning Commission of Contra Costa County approved the final environmental impact report for both refineries. It was appealed, and it was in May of 2022 then that we were denied by the county in those appeals. And it was a bit later then in 2022 that litigation was initiated. So for the lawyers in the room or the aspiring lawyers to know, then Communities for a Better Environment, the Center for Biological Diversity, and the Stanford Environmental Law Clinic did litigate on both of those projects. And remarkably enough, in the summer of 2023, the judge in Martinez, which is a small town in Contra Costa County that has 2 refineries, actually decertified the environmental review of the Phillips 66 project. It was to say that piecemealing, the lack of cumulative analysis, and the failure for the environmental impact review to have integrated the things that had been happening in the refinery in terms of how Phillips 66 had begun producing renewable diesel, believe it or not, in 2021. We won, right? The county responded by producing, with the help of Phillips 66, a revised environmental impact report, which was released in November. At the same time, the Marathon Martinez refinery in November of 2023 had a fire incident there that was so serious that one of the workers was airlifted away from the refinery and taken to the UC Davis Burn Center. We had already brought to the attention the dangers of refining these liquid biofuels because of the reliance on phenomenal amounts of hydrogen. These refineries have old, antiquated technology that we call hydrocrackers. It's the same technology that they use for refining petroleum that they were starting to refine these liquid biofuels from, the so-called renewable feedstocks. When this fire broke out, we started telling the county that they needed to slow down on the Phillips 66 project because there's really clear safety issues, there's clear public health issues, and we needed to have more information. This fire at the Martinez refinery that happened last November is being investigated by the United States Chemical Safety Board. The county, however, totally didn't want to hear anything about it. And by late December, they'd already approved the revised environmental impact report. And then just this week, the judge who had decertified the FEIR went ahead and put their stamp of approval on it. So despite the fact that there was an accident of this nature right there in the face of the community while the environmental review was happening, the county and the state authorities didn't want to take, that stop, look, and listen approach to this. So we are now dealing with the fact that both of these projects are moving forward full speed. And why is it happening? It's because of climate policy. And we have federal policy, we have the renewable fuel standard, we have the California low carbon fuel standard, which is, though I'm not expert, very similar to mechanisms that have been developed here in Oregon and up in Washington. And then we also have the aviation industry pushing with their carbon offsetting reduction scheme for international aviation, which depends on offsetting and biofuels to ostensibly decarbonize the aviation industry. And then one other thing that I'd really point out is the Inflation Reduction Act has a lot of money in it for these really dirty bioenergy type products. Our organization then has taken a pretty firm stance to actually push back. We don't think the IRA is a climate bill. It's an energy bill. We don't call it a climate bill. And we think it's actually a misrepresentation of what the bill really entails when people say, oh, this is like the most important climate legislation that's ever been passed in the country. We say, no, it's an energy bill, all right, but it's not a climate bill. So what we're seeing here is the unholy matrimony between big oil and big ag. So groups not even groups, we're talking transnational corporations like ADM, Bunge, Bayer, which is now the owner of Monsanto, have been very active in Sacramento. And they are very interested in the low carbon fuel standard and how they have an opportunity to sell their agricultural products now for making fuel. As I said, though, it's a really emissions intensive process to make these fuels at these refineries. It takes a phenomenal amount of hydrogen. All of the hydrogen is procured from the steam reformation of fossil gas. It is not a fossil-free fuel product because of this intensive use of fossil fuels to make the fuel. So, you know, to call it low carbon, we feel is a bit of a misnomer. But big oil and big ag are relishing this opportunity to come together and protect their business models and to paint it as a climate solution. So I'm going to start to move a little bit now from this focus on the refineries, though we are going to get a chance because of Barbara's presentation to learn a little bit more about what's going in the refinery, what's going on in the refinery corridor, and also really talk about how that is useful for understanding what's happening on the Columbia River with the next energy proposal to build a renewable diesel refinery there. There's a lot of little rabbit holes I could fall down here in terms of what's going on at the refineries and the false characterization of the making of these fuels as being somehow a way that they're cleaning up what's happening at these refineries. We're talking about a toxic legacy of more than a century. And what we really need to be doing is assuring that we can have a way to clean these places up. But unfortunately, the pivot to biofuels has created like another bubble of armor around these energy transnational corporations that protects them. So the proponents of these fuels will talk a lot about how they're low carbon. And then when we've argued with them, and we did so throughout the environmental review process, making a real clear point that we understand the technology and we understand that this is an emissions intensive process to make these fuels. As a matter of fact, it creates more greenhouse gas emissions to make a liquid fuel from a feedstock like soy than it does to make a liquid fuel from petroleum. But then the proponents will always say, whoa, these are renewable feedstocks. Things like canola oil, things like animal tallow. For instance, imagine there are ocean tankers full of animal tallow coming into California. Yeah. We've never, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too much, but we've never gotten the authorities to talk about what would it mean is if there was an accident with one of these tankers in San Francisco Bay, and suddenly we had a massive spill of animal tallow in the bay. They've admitted that would be a major problem, but no one wants to talk about it. There's been no transparent discussion about it. But the proponents will always say, well, these biofuels are really climate friendly because the feedstocks are renewable. Because of time, I'm going to go through these last slides really quick, but to really drive home the fact that making fuel from food and from feedstocks like soy is not a climate solution. And the first thing to understand is that soy is, without doubt, a high deforestation risk commodity. Technically, understand this term of indirect land use change, that when it's not really just where the one grain of soy comes from, but it's the increased demand for food, feed, and fuel for these feedstocks that continues to push the monoculture ag model further out into pristine ecosystems. So deforestation is a known outcome from increased cultivation of soy. There's really intricate and complicated but clear connections between the expansion of the livestock industry and the soy agricultural model. And then I want to bring this up in particular because Phillips 66 has now had a permit application under the low carbon fuel standard where they'll be receiving incentive monies for making renewable diesel from soy from specifically Argentina, from the Chaco. The red here is all the the commodity-driven deforestation over the last 28 years in the Chaco from basically the expansion of the soy model. This is the same information, but in a graph form, where in Argentina, we've seen that deforestation may have come down to a lesser level over the last decade, but it's continued to be a serious problem. And that also in 2022, there was as much commodity-driven deforestation in Argentina as there has been since 2013. Biodiversity loss is an important issue for us to understand when it comes to climate stability and environmental integrity, as is the focus on greenhouse gas emissions. And the other thing that we really want to make sure that people understand is that the soy model that's expanded in places in Argentina is completely dependent on genetically modified soy varieties that are ostensibly resistant to pesticides. So, you know, the Roundup Ready soy has resulted in a massive public health crisis in the areas where we're talking about really serious issues with people's health. I have spoken about soy as a feedstock, but Phillips 66 is also now applying for permits to bring used cooking oil from Malaysia, South Korea, Japan, and Singapore. They want to bring the UCO, the used cooking oil, but increasingly there's major issues with fraud because used cooking oil is such incentivized feedstock for making these fuels that it's really profitable to splash the used cooking oil with virgin palm oil. So palm, even though it's disincentivized in California for making these fuels, it's still expanding dramatically. ICCT has done the research to show that as we use more soy in the US because of market elasticities, that more palm oil is coming in to replace the soy in the products that were using soy previously. So if you don't have the soy to make your cookies because it's going to make renewable diesel, then you're just using palm oil. So more and more palm oil is coming into the States because more and more soy is being used for making the fuel. So these market elasticities are really important. And this is where, people understand that there's no such thing as waste. All this stuff is already being used. So the industry loves to say, oh, we're just using waste oils and everything, but this stuff is already being used. Really quickly about food to fuel and land constraints. The green line on this graph is the total land area of Indiana. There's actually 4 refineries in California that are now making renewable diesel from feedstocks like soy. But you can see here with the graph that to meet the needs of those refineries surpasses the entire land area of Indiana. And then lastly, there's a lot of talk about how we're replacing the use of fossil fuels with the production of renewable diesel. In California, our estimate that it's about 30% of the refined fuels that are produced in the refinery sector in California that are being exported to foreign markets. We're talking about a dystopian future in California where we're all driving Teslas, but the refineries are still cranking full speed because they're just shipping the fuels to Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, Chile, South Korea, all around the Pacific Rim. 30% of the refined fuels that come out of California are being shipped to foreign markets. So the punchline for my presentation here, before I hand it over to Barbara then, is that this political convenience of converting fossil fuel infrastructure to bioenergy threatens our land, threatens our communities, it threatens ecosystems, and it threatens our climate. And it's a false solution, and thus I hope I've set things up so that Barbara can take things over, because we know that a main purpose of organizing in this panel is to create momentum to stop this refinery that's being proposed for the Columbia River. There's no reasonable justification for building a renewable diesel refinery on the shores of the Columbia River. So this is my last slide, and I think I went over a little bit for sure, but I'll hand it over to Barbara now, and we'll move into what's happening here in Oregon.
Bring it down a little bit. Can you hear me? We're going to first get a little review of what Gary talked about, because I happened to have an opportunity in November to ride on the San Francisco Baykeeper boat in the San Pablo and Tucson Bay with Gary and several other activists who have been fighting fossil fuel industry in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I got to take a little video of what we were passing through.
This is a salmon power spot for me, man. This is a serious salmon spot. Yeah. Well, because every single salmon either returning or leaving from the Sacramento San Joaquin has to go right here. 40 million. 40%. Every single one. The whole. These bullets, that's the hydrocracking complex. You got a pretty good view of that black exposure. And there's another hydrogen plant right in front of the over that's small.
So now we're going to go about 650 miles northwest up to the Columbia River estuary. And this is Port Westward, which is this beautiful point of land that juts out into the estuary there. And this is, if you're not familiar with Port Westward itself, it's just a little bit north of Claskenai. You know where Claskenai is. And this has been an interesting area. It's one of the best places to farm in the Northwest, maybe in the United States. It's incredible soil, and it's famed for its blueberries and its mint, and it's very much of a rural tradition. And Claskenai is one of those really sweet, small Oregon towns that has a lot of character and a lot of beauty. It also has been the target of the fossil fuel industry for many, many years, and they have thrown so many proposals at Port Westward, including coal terminals, oil terminals, biodiesel. There's actually a plant now that's still making ethanol. Global Partners is the only fossil fuel industry that's kind of embedded there. And then there's a big Portland General Electric gas refinery there. But we'll just kind of spin through Port Westward to get a sense. This is the Columbia River estuary right here. And this is part of the estuary and the backwaters. As you can see, it's a far cry from the San Pablo Bay. It's farmland, beautiful, beautiful farmland. That's the Grange. It's more of classic barns, water towers. It's also the home of one of the most notable Buddhist monasteries in the United States. the great now Zen monastery. And they come into the story in a little bit too. They'd be right across the road from what we're about to start talking about. This is Global Partners. This is kind of a miniature of what would happen in Port Westford if plans proceed on this new renewable diesel project. So after Port Westford has been able to fight off coal terminals, the world's largest methanol refinery, which Northwest Innovation Works, after being beaten out of or chased out of Tacoma and Kalama, they had their last option was Port Westford. And it took a long time for that place to actually shut down. In fact, Northwest Innovation Works had gone out of business before the Port of Columbia County acknowledged that Northwest Innovation Works had withdrawn its application to build the world's largest methanol refinery in Port Westford. But now, here comes, actually it's about 5 years ago, a company called Next Renewable Fuels. And they had plans to build a renewable diesel refinery at the same scale as what we were seeing on San Pablo Bay and Suisun Bay. It's a huge industrial complex, which would include a hydrogen plant, a hydrogen production facility. And the interesting thing about all of this, besides the fact that Next Renewables is a very shady company, like some of the other companies that have come through the Northwest and like Northwest Innovation Works, and they had a very shady history in Odessa, Washington, where they had some kind of seed cracking facility which went under and cost the community hundreds of millions of dollars, and they left a big mess to clean up. So at first they tried to propose this renewable diesel refinery in Longview, Washington, which is up in Calais County. If you're not from our area, it's about 50 miles north of Portland. And it's on another stretch of the Columbia River. That's kind of the end of the estuary. And just across the river and a little bit south of Port Westford. And Longview, which is not known for being very critical of some of the fossil fuel industries that have been proposed for that region, turned down Next Energy. They were too flaky even for Longview. So then they put their sites across the river in Port Westford. At first, people were not that concerned. It's a renewable diesel. That sounds like a great thing. It's green energy. And as we learned in Portland, when Zenith Energy decided to convert to renewable diesel to convince Portland that we could live with them, we started scratching our heads going, well, what is renewable diesel? And we've learned an awful lot in the last year and a half since they changed. This proposal came up. And I learned a lot by going down to California. Actually, Dan Sears with Columbia Riverkeeper said, if you want to learn about renewable diesel, go down to the Bay Area. They've been fighting it for years. And I just kind of scratched the surface on my first trip down there, realizing what a huge problem it is. And I think Gary did a very good job of explaining why we don't want to produce this. But besides it being a bad thing for a farming community to be doing, there's some specific things about Port Westford which make it particularly bad for a place to have such a large industrial complex. We just mentioned kind of circuitously about the CEI Hub, the Critical Energy Infrastructure Hub in Portland, which among other things is built on liquefaction, in the liquefaction zone, which means that when there's an earthquake, which is going to happen in the next 50 years, the ground doesn't just shake, it turns to jello and to liquid. And that's because it's built on fill from when they dredged the Columbia River to make a shipping channel back by where Swan Island is, and took all the dredging materials and they covered up lakes that were on that side of the Willamette River and filled it, and they built this industrial complex. And we know it's just worse than a catastrophe waiting to happen when the earthquake comes and everything, all the tanks that are holding 90% of the state's liquid fuel erupt. Well, Fort Westford is like making another critical energy infrastructure catastrophe in an even more sensitive environmental space, right in the estuary of the Columbia River, which is a place where the Columbia River bends, and it's one of the most important salmon habitats in the Northwest, maybe one of the most critical salmon habitats in the world. And there's been hundreds of millions of dollars spent on improving salmon habitat there. So why would you build a renewable diesel refinery that could really threaten that habitat? So that's part of the problem. The other problem is that there's a lot of really important farming going on. We're looking at the mint fields of Warren Seeley, who's been growing mint, really incredible organic mint on Port Westford for years. And there's Warren, and he's going to point out to us, well, actually, he lost his farm. I mean, he lost his part of his farm a couple months ago. But this, where he was growing mint, is where they want to put a train yard in, expand a train yard. So it turns out, and we'll just go back a little bit, as Zenith Energy and a lot of these other companies changed their storyline a lot, Next Energy came in and said, we're going to be just producing renewable fuel, we're going to be using organic or natural feedstocks, and we are not going to be bringing anything in by train, it's all going to come in by boat. And then they were trying to get Warren's land to put in this train switching yard. And so why is that? Well, it turns out, we're going to get a lot of our feedstock from Indiana, southern Illinois. It's going to be soybean oil, believe it or not. And it's going to come in on trains. And they, to complicate matters, the dock that they were going to dock their boats at, that were going to be carrying things like fish grease and used cooking oil and all that stuff that was actual waste. Well, that dock had an accident a few months ago and it's out of commission. So there's no dock right now in Port Westford for them even to bring a boat in. But that's been one of the big concerns, is that one of the last things that this area needs is more rail expansion, more oil trains, basically, even if they're soybean oil trains, going through not just Clatskanie, but St. Helens and Rainier and Columbia City and all these other little towns along Highway 30 that go along the Columbia River, where the train tracks actually bisect each one of those towns. And so you can't get from the hospital or from your house to the hospital maybe, because the trains, these mile-long oil trains, are going to be blocking tracks for, could be hours at a time. So the community's not really big about the oil trains or any trains going through. And the farmers are not big about what is going to be happening to their land, and also to the fact that this is a very interesting drainage district. It's got all these dikes, which are not would not do much protection in a flood, but they help irrigate the land, or keep the land irrigated when it needs to be and keep the floodwaters out. It's serviceable enough for farming. But the drainage district is controlled by the farmers, and Next Energy tried to take over the drainage district, but they failed at that. But basically, the drainage district has some say in whether they can use this land, or they can use the dikes. So there's like all these questionable things about how reasonable it is to convert incredibly productive farmland with a Buddhist monastery to boot. The people in the Buddhist monastery are very much adamantly opposed to this facility. In fact, the only real support for Next Energy in the Port Westford Clatskanie area is from the Port of Columbia County and a few of the business interests in Clatskanie. And other than that, everybody's against it. So let's just look at Warren Seeley's fields for a moment and see these are no longer growing. He had to pull up all his mint. But this is where they want to put a major rail yard. There's the railroad tracks as they exist right now. So another alternative for the future of Clatskanie, instead of it being fossil fuel, could be like to really celebrate its local food heritage. And here are, this is Brendan Schilling and Jasmine Lillick, and they run the Clatskanie Food Hub. They're also farmers, organic farmers outside of Clatskanie. And they have been bringing farmers together and helping them to have a market for their food. And inside the Food Hub, they sell all kinds of great stuff. Let's go back for a second. And this would actually be a much more feasible economic future for Clatskanie than being another fossil fuel hub. So other things that have kind of come up that are pointing like whether or not Next Energy, oh, by the way, Next Energy has changed its name. These companies also like to change their name, so it's no longer Next Renewable Fuels, there's now NXT Clean Fuels. And I went on their website the other night to look at it, and first of all, they said that they could be up and running in 2025. However, they've gotten a number of permits from the state, which is a big concern, because this, and one of the things that Columbia Riverkeeper, who's been working really ardently to stop this project, and people like farmers like Warren Seeley, and Jasmine and Brandon, who've been really in the forefront of organizing opposition to Next Energy. One of the things they're pointing out is that the finances of now NIPS, I like to call it, clean fuels, is very shaky. And they just sort of discovered recently that, and this is an article that was in the Oregon Business just a couple days ago, that they're supposed to be paying the Port of Columbia County $108,497 a month, but they're currently paying them $15,000 because they don't have any money. And so one hope is that they're going to go out of business like all these other companies do. But in the meantime, it's important that we step up to the Department of DEQ is actually the next place to go because they need some more permits. So, oops, sorry about that. Doesn't want to stay there. This is frustrating. Okay. So if you want to find out more about how to get involved in stopping NXT, Clean Energy Renewable Diesel Refinery at Port Westford, you can contact Dan Sears at Columbia Riverkeeper, and that's his email, dan@columbiariverkeeper.org. And this is a rather long URL, but you could also, I think if you email Dan, he'll send you the URL on the Columbia Riverkeeper site, where you can, there's a whole really good frequently asked questions about what it's about. There'll be a series of hearings and other things coming up. There's also an issue about putting pressure on the port not to grant NXT this incredible reduction in their rent, because, and for one thing, the port will go out of business if they don't get as much money for rent as they need. And there'll be other hearings, including ones in DEQ. So it's keep this in mind, because this is sort of off the radar right now around the state. But like Jordan Cove, which was off the radar for most of the state until just a few years before it was shut down, this is another project that affects the whole state. Because if the estuary of the Columbia River is besmirched, it's going to be doing harm for the rest of the state. And also having one more diesel refinery, whether it's renewable or not, in the Columbia estuary is going to harm our entire region. So please think about this, get involved, and remember that Clastonite is part of your neighborhood.
Thank you, Barbara. Finally, we have Michael Council with the Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group. I'm excited to hear you speak, Michael.
Hello, everyone. It's good to see everyone here. And I'm not going to have any slides, so you'll just be listening to me. I'll be your slide in the next few moments. Our presenters, the panelists, have showed us some amazing images of what these critical energy infrastructure hubs look like, what the fossil fuel, agricultural hubs will look like, Clastonite, as in the Bay Area. In Portland, there is, the CEI hub, and what the CEI hub does is it really impacts a community there that has been impacted by a variety of different things. So I'm going to talk about the CEI hub and Portland Harbor Superfund, but mainly about the communities that have been impacted in that area. These are folks who are basically, I say that, North Portland, Portland Harbor, and where the CEI hub is like another lung, or the lungs, one of the lungs of Portland, where you have downtown as an economic lung of the city, and then you have the CEI hub, North Portland, the Port of Portland, Portland Harbor is the other lung, but it's a polluted one. And it's a lung where all of the waste, all of Portland's water treatment, all of the fuel that the state needs is planted in this area. There's roughly about anywhere between 94.6 to 193.7 million gallons of fuel that is stored in the CEI hub. And as Barbara was saying, this is all located on liquefaction soil. So we know that an earthquake is going to happen eventually in our future, and the people who live in North Portland are the ones who are going to really take the brunt of that. They'll probably just be gone because there will be a major explosion that would just probably incinerate 5-mile radius of that area. But it's not just also North Portland's problem as well. It's also a problem for the whole entire region. Portland State University and Multnomah County worked together on creating a document to actually analyze like what is in the CEI hub and how will it actually affect. And it turned out to be a complete nightmare. The effect could be as far north, and I'm hoping folks are familiar with the region, but as far north as Ridgefield, Washington, and as far south as Lake Oswego. So it's not necessarily just the fuels that are being stored in this area, but it's also the toxic vapor that can like move throughout the whole entire region. So it's something that we really, as Oregonians in general, that we all need to be paying attention to, and Washingtonians too. So it's not just a Portland problem. Also with that too, 90% of the fuel of the state is actually stored there. So it's definitely an Oregon problem. And speaking about the people that live in North Portland who happen to be minority people, poor working class folks, this area is also located to a lot of schools, a lot of daycare centers, this area, students tend to also kind of test a pretty, below state average on a lot of academic tests. We don't know if there's necessarily a correlation between it, but we feel that there is because of the pollution that's in this area, the particulate matter of the industrial sanctuary, which is far from the sanctuary. Our board, the Breda River Campaign, and the Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group, we really think that it's important that there is an equity in the distribution of these risks. We really feel that communities should actually be somewhat responsible or spread the risk in their own communities. So let's try to not have all of this in just one spot. And also it's not a good place to have all your fuel to go up in one area. What are we to do if there is an earthquake? How are we going to fuel planes that are coming and going to leave? What do you do? There's really, it's a total disaster scenario. And there's also was in the report from Multnomah County and PSU, Portland State University, that there would be this would be worse than Exxon Valdez. It would move all the way to the mouth of the Columbia, so it would definitely impact Class 9. It would definitely impact that there as well. So to put more of a human face on the whole thing with the CEI hub and Portland Harbor Superfund is that there has been some wins. and the big win is basically that we are aware of it. There was no one had a clue that, that this area was going to be such a risk. There was, the majority of these 605 containers were built before there was even any type of seismic knowledge or earthquake knowledge that could possibly happen in our region. And some of them didn't even have, they weren't even codes written for how their infrastructure should actually be. So the fact that we actually know is quite, remarkable. The other thing too is that people have actually, pushed, our leaders in Portland. It was community members, it was everyday Portlanders, grassroots folks who actually rose up and said, hey, you need to do something about this. It's not just, for you just to ignore the fact that we have this huge risk in our backyard. It's important for you to do something about it. So it's, I like to give some kudos to, the commissioners at Multnomah County who actually, pushed to have this done, to have the report done, and also to PSU for working in collaboration with them, because we're much more aware of the risks that are there and who is actually at risk. For a long time, we kind of thought that this was just our problem in North Portland. And now we realize that it's a regional problem. It's everybody's problem. So everyone needs to get on board on that. The Portland Harbor itself has been, was listed as a Superfund site. It's 11 miles in Portland, in the Lower Willamette River. It was listed in 2000. And Portlanders have been on the ball with this for 23 years. Finally, there's actual design work going to it to get the work done, to actually start doing some work to remove the pollutants, or to at least isolate them so that they're not an issue in the sediment that actually impacts our resident fish, and also the people who do some of the subsistence fishing in the river. After the record of decision that happened in 2017 for Portland Harbor, we've also seen major eyes moving towards the river. There's more engagement in it. So, there's a lot of bad things that are happening, but there's a lot of really great things that are happening too. So, I try to make an acknowledgement of that. One of the things that really kind of makes me wonder, is, where is the courage in our city when it comes to Portland Harbor, when it comes to the CEI hub? So, just getting prepared for this and reading up on some things, I went to, Multnomah County's website and I was able to find, information about the CEI hub and the document that was created. I also was able to go to PSU's website and look at their website about the document as well. And when I went to the city of Portland, it's not there. So it's really disappointing to know that there's a lack of courage, I believe, with some of our elected officials, and really letting people know about the risk. It's in the folks in Portland. It's in our interest to know what is happening in our communities and what risk we are to be living with. We're excited in Portland Harbor, with Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group, about how we have been creating coalitions with other orgs through the Braided River campaign to bring people together and really kind of elevate the voices about what is happening in the CEI hub, what is happening in Portland Harbor. We're really excited about the fact that we're trying to bring eyes to the river and have people realize that once you are focused on something that you care about, or that you are involved in, once you're in the water, either it be on kayaks, either it be in canoes. We are working with groups who are offering kayaking libraries, so that anyone who's interested in wanting to get out on the water, they can go and get a kayak and take quick lessons and get out there and be in the water. And they also can store your kayak for you, or just getting folks of color who typically just roll past the river and just see it as a flyover, to actually get in the water and change their relationship to the river, regardless of the CI hub or the Superfund, but just to be engaged in it. And this makes a big difference, because once you care about something, once you appreciate what you have basically taken for granted, you learn to protect it. You want to do something to say, hey, this is mine. This is mine, and this is my kids, and and it actually belonged to my grandparents, who had basically worked on the river for X number of years. So there's a great uplift, I feel, over the past 3 years about working with community to have them become aware of the risks that we have to live with, but also become aware of the joys of coming together to fight these battles, to find commonality to push forward and move forward and educate ourselves on what we need to do and how we can move forward on that too. Being on the a land use planner for the city of Portland as a commissioner, and what that has been able to offer me is actually to kind of be in the room with a lot of these decisions are being made. And it also shows that, we're strategic, Portlanders are strategic about going after what needs to be done. And it's a really inspiring way to see how community comes together to, go against some things that are huge. These are not little battles. They're big battles. And we're coming together and we're trying to figure it out, and we're doing it. And it's very exciting to be a part of a community that is doing that. Now, to tell you, there's still a lot of hard work to be done. As Nick earlier was talking about, dealing with some of our local officials, they're being persuaded and pressured from all types of angles. We have core interest, embedded interest in our city government who are very traditionalist. They don't like to change. They like to keep things going as they go. So with that, as I'm ending, we are just take note that, these issues that we're dealing with in Portland, the things that we face, we know that we can surmount them when we come together, as a community, as we, face these challenges, and that, we are able to strategize and bring light to these really creepy situations. And thanks for taking the time to listen.
Thank you so much, Michael. With that, I just want to share some ways. We always like to end these panels with ways for everyone to take action with us. So, yeah, I hope that we'll also have some time for questions if you have any. But I hope that everyone feels like they can share, like fight back against this greenwashing when you see it in your communities now. If you signed up when you walked in, we had a couple different sign-in sheets. We will be sharing more information. You can learn about upcoming Rumble on the Rivers, our next community forum, Rumble number 15, will be on April 16th up in Portland. And if you sign up, you can get more information about that and exactly where it is. And we would also love for, on your program, there's all the phone numbers for every level of elected officials. You can call them, leave this on your fridge. It's great to have, call them about any issue, but also about renewable fuels and how we need to fight back against these facilities. And take a picture of this and send an email to Matthew Davis at the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality about the Zenith issue. As Nick detailed, they really need to hear from us as much as possible about how their community is against them giving any future permits to Zenith Energy. Yeah, with that, I will see if anyone has questions for our panelists in our final couple of minutes. Yeah, let's start back here.
Yeah, I wanted to know what the governor, top down, is doing, or how they're responding, and what about congressmen? What's their response to this? Are they on our side, or are they on fossil fuel, renewable fuel side?
Great question. Yeah, so from the state and federal levels, anyone want to take a stab at that?
You want to pass the mic down to us?
Sure. Yes.
Good. Who wants to? Anybody want to pass
As far as Zenith goes, there was a action alert in the fall to just start driving comments to the governor to have her speak on this at all. To my knowledge, she's never taken a position. And after lots of comments went her way, still silence. She is the buck stops with her around a lot of the decisions that state agencies make, although there is some independence of the agencies as well. And so why she's taken that position, it might be a little bit controversial. It's a little bit, we're in a very small political state, and the person who is at the center of the controversy in Portland is the chief of staff of the commissioner named Carmen Rubio. And her name is Jillian, I think she pronounces Shoney, Schoene. She's the person that names are blacked out of documents and stuff like that. She used to run a statewide advocacy organization called Emerge Oregon to elect female leaders. So she's very embedded in the political world. And so I think that there's probably some personal protectionism of this individual that's don't want to touch this thing that our buddy in getting us elected is doing. Personally, I think that's likely. And then we have elected officials that are at the federal level have been pretty good on a lot of these fossil fuel issues. Merkley will speak against GTN. He was really active on Jordan Cove, as well as the first person to really lean in. But Representative Blumenauer, who's retiring, and there's a contested election in Congressional District 3, is silent on this. And so it's been, again, maybe there are some of these personal connections that are doing it, but it's very bizarre for people who otherwise have pretty nice environmental leadership to just be oh, this oil terminal that tens of thousands of people in Portland speak about and care about, it's just we can't say a word about it. So, but both of the candidates, or there's a lot of candidates running in Congressional District 3, and two of those candidates have very specific experience as it relates to the hub and have taken pretty strong positions against. So it's likely that will change from at least
least that congressional district in the future.
Mark? Yeah.
First, Nick, I'd love to hear if you have a recommendation on candidates.
No. No.
And secondly,
Not this breach collective in front of a camera. Yeah,
any calculation that's been made of the percentage of the Portland city budget, which is based on tax money from the CEI hub industries. Because it seems to me that may be a huge amount of money.
I've seen some sketches about trying to figure out what that is, but I don't know that we actually have the specifics, but we're working on that. I think I'm in a position, I'm not representing any of the nonprofits that work with me now. So as an individual, there's one person who's running for Boon C, who I'm very excited about, who's Sheila Jayapal, whose sister is already in Congress, and she's the head of the Progressive Caucus of the U.S. House of Representatives. And she's been a Multnomah County Commissioner for a while, and she's very clear about all of this. And then Maxine Dexter, I think, also has a very good record on these things. One person who I was a little bit not comfortable about on some of these issues was Lynn Peterson, but she's dropped out of the race. And then I'm not sure who else is running. A couple other people, but so I mean, I think there's a good chance between at least the two of the candidates are definitely very proactive about Zenith and about climate issues and about fossil fuel in general, and also about the CEI.
Yeah, just to add that, and this is not an endorsement for Jayapal at all, but she does show up, and she shows up to the community, and that says a lot to hear people's voices and concerns about the CEI hub and Portland Harbor Superfund.
She's a panelist at one of our events. Yeah.
I have a question for Nick. Doesn't the secret deal that was made for Zenith violate the public meetings law?
Only 2 of the 5 commissioners were at the meeting, and so didn't reach majority status. I mean, I have made the argument, and a bunch of us actually in the room made the argument that a lot of what happened violated local and state law, and we have yet to find a place to get that heard, but not one of the ones they didn't violate was the public meetings law.
Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Bakken crude is coming through Portland, and do they frack that? Does it come from public land in U.S. or Canada?
Okay. The Bakken crude comes from Bakken clay that's in North Dakota, and I think into eastern Montana. It's all fracked.
It's all fracked.
It's all fracked.
In Canada too.
But the Bakken crude doesn't come from Canada. I'm not sure if it's. I know for a while Zenith was getting tar sands oil, which comes from northern Alberta, and that is definitely from Canada. And that has they both have serious problems. Bakken fuel is famous for exploding oil trains, and the tar sands oil sinks when it gets into the water. And the most notorious incident was Kalamazoo River in Michigan, where it still hasn't been cleaned up. It's been like 8 years, I think, since that spill.
Public land? Private?
In Canada, it's not public land. It's all owned. A lot of it's owned by Canadian oil companies. I mean, by Norwegian oil companies, and then some Canadian oil companies, and then U.S. and international. There's a whole bunch of different oil companies that are up there.
North Dakota, Montana?
I'm not sure. That's probably private land, isn't it? I don't know. I'm not sure. The Bakken's a very large region.
Jen?
Yeah, can you talk about the renewable fuel standards and how's that played into the future of the hub?
Do you want to talk about that? Oh, we're talking about here as opposed to California? Or?
Yeah, here, RC, I have, and Zenith and the whole future of the.
Yeah, this is something I'm still kind of working on figuring out. But this is the California, Washington, and Oregon have these low carbon fuel standards, and
in California is just like really in high gear with giving carbon credits to renewable diesel, stuff like that. In Oregon, my understanding is that renewable diesel is considered a renewable fuel, and it only, I think at this point, is a small percentage of fuel, of a mixture of diesel would have, it has to be a very, well, if I scratch that. So the other issue is also biodiesel, which is also considered a low carbon fuel. And that's where you have to mix it with conventional diesel, and it's like 15% is how much you can mix it. And our standards in Oregon at this point wouldn't even allow that to be considered a renewable fuel. So it's one of these problems that's happening across the board, in the way Gary was talking about, even with the Inflation Reduction Act, that the feds and the state regulators have all bought the hype about renewable fuels, and that this is being considered green. I mean, the fossil fuel industry is doing a great job of greenwashing what's really dangerous fuels. I want to throw out one little thing, because Gary was mentioning about problems of having rendered animal stuff, spilled in the water. There was an incident I learned about in California a few years ago. It was called the mysterious goo in the San Francisco Bay. And my understanding is it turned out to be soybean oil. It took them a really long time to figure out what it was. And the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard and Army Corps of Engineers, and the Coast Guard anyway, it was like, it's not our problem, it's not fossil fuel, so it's not us. And I don't know how they finally cleaned it up, but it killed a lot of marine animals. It was really serious, and it was an indication of, first of all, the unknowns of what this stuff can do, and secondly, if you just imagine, I don't know, I mean, I feed my cats fish oil every day, and it's not just enough, just to get it on my fingers. And to have hundreds of millions of gallons of fish oil spilling into the Columbia River or the Willamette River or the San Francisco Bay is a really frightening proposition.
I'll add a little detail to the local renewable fuel standard conversation, because I think it's important. It's something I skipped over. So we had a renewable fuel standard passed right around the time that Zenith was getting its permissions to transition to being a renewable fuels transloader. And the city, I don't know if they ever directly said it would apply to Zenith, but they gave the impression that don't worry, we have laws. Importantly, Zenith doesn't sell into our market. They only move things through. So the renewable fuel standard only applies to retailers within the community. So it doesn't apply to Zenith as it goes. And then the code itself is written in a way that if there isn't enough renewable fuel on the market to meet its standards, then it basically, you can just revert back to the status quo. So it's like, oh, we're gonna I don't know, it's like a useless market signal, basically. It's like it's not a mandate, it's a suggestion in good times that everything goes. And so advocates, we've been basically saying one of the reasons we don't trust that beyond Zenith lying constantly for years and years, you shouldn't trust them anyway, but just from a market perspective, we don't think there will be enough of this fuel to satisfy the operations of this facility come 5 years. And so our position is that it's just kicking the can down the road. It's just a way for the city to have a good excuse to do the thing that they would want to do, and be able to try to make people less mobilized around the issue. And then we're going to have the same fucking fight in 5 years from now or whatever, when their air permit expires, and the same questions about the state, local government's ability to want to fight an oil company with resources to put in lawyers. It's going to be the same thing. So very much see it as just a delay on top of everything else.
We have time for one more question, and then the panelists will be here. You can come chat with us. Kate?
Well, I just kind of to tag on to what Nick was saying, and maybe Gary, you have some input on this. One thing that's been a concern is that a lot of the regulatory language is really specifically written around fuels that are purchased and sold. In the case of Zenith, they're in the business of storage and transport. They don't ever own the product. And so one concern that keeps coming up is where is the mechanism for enforcing accountability if there's something that happens and prevents them from just pointing at the track and saying, we don't own this stuff, we're just moving it. Do you have that issue in California as well, or is there any mechanism that you have in place that we should push for, or something like that?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is that these low carbon type mechanisms are extremely complicated. And they're almost designed to keep the public from getting involved because it's so complicated it can really be a barrier to public engagement. So the question that you're bringing up is really important about how is there accountability when these fields are produced and the producers are getting incentives. I think there's cross-jurisdictional questions that help the producers avoid accountability. And for instance, then, my understanding of the next clean energy proposal for this refinery on the Columbia River is that even if they were to be successful in producing large amounts of this renewable diesel, that it's possible that if the mechanism in Oregon wasn't adequate for them to get the return on what they're looking for, that they would simply export that refined product to California or Washington State, or perhaps the mechanisms that would serve them. So then you have this situation where a local community is shouldering the burden of the pollution from the production of this fuel, but then the producer is just going to ship it out to another jurisdiction and take advantage of a market-based mechanism. So the accountability question does become one of elusiveness, right? Sand through the fingers, but I don't have all the answers on how these mechanisms work. It's been a crash course. I became an expert in cap and trade. And then all of a sudden had to start dealing with the low carbon fuel standard. And there's a whole community of us who are like, wow, we can't believe that we were blind to what was happening with the LCFS this whole time. So for us then, with that accountability, I think though, what we want to be aware of is the long-term interest of the fuel producers to link these mechanisms. So with both carbon markets like cap and trade, now existing California, Washington State is working very hard to link their market with California. We're very confident that there is an effort to try to link the low carbon fuel standard mechanisms all along the West Coast. So I just flagged that to say that your question is right on the money. I don't have an answer for how we can have some assurances to be able to pursue accountability, but that we need to study that for sure. It's a non-answer, really.
Still informative.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Please check out our wonderful materials on your way out, including great maps at the CEI Hub, and sign up for more updates. Thank you.
Yeah.